morning, everybody. We're back and we're here for God's chosen family. Does he tell me right? Quick, easy. Yesterday we was on the names of God and scattering the people and the Tower of Babel. And now we're on page 26 with God's chosen family. God's perfect creation had been made by sin. Even with a new beginning after the flood, humanity continued to rebel against God. The incident with the Tower of Babel is just one example of how people were following other gods and pursuing their own glory. God broke into his creation once again and spoke to one man, asking him to leave the things that the world was offering him behind and to go to a new place in complete reliance on God. God promised Abram that he would make him into a great nation and that he would use him to bless the entire world. Abram heard the voice of God and responded in faith. He left the city where he had grown up and traveled across the known world to settle in the land that God showed him. Abram received a new name, Abraham, and in his story we discover the beginning of God's covenant people and the broad strokes of his salvation plan. Salvation comes by faith. Abraham's descendants will be God's people, and the Savior of the world will come through this chosen nation. The stories of Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph that follow are more than interesting biographies. They emphasize the promises of God and the proof that he is faithful. The people we meet in Genesis are simple, ordinary people. Yet, through them, God did great things. Their lives are vivid pictures of how God uses all kinds of people to accomplish his good purposes, even people like you. So you have people and culture, nomadic culture. Although there were some great cities in the early world, such as Ur, where Abraham was born, most of the people we meet early on in the pages of the Bible were nomadic. They lived in tents, measured their wealth in livestock, and settled down temporarily in areas that were fertile enough to support their herds and family. The family was the primary social unit, and large extended families would travel together along with their servants, effectively forming tribes and villages when they settled. Sometimes families would be forced to move to a new area due to famine, seasonal weather changes, or simply because they outgrew their land. Abraham. Born as Abram in the cultural center of Ur, he followed God's command to move to the land of Canaan. Although God promised to make him into a great nation, Abraham and his wife Sarah were childless until a very old age. When God miraculously provided a son for them, Abraham was faithful to God, but he was far from perfect. He lied at least twice about the identity of his wife. He had a child with his wife's servant in an effort to speed up God's plan. And his later treatment of Ishmael and Hagar was less than admirable. In spite of these failures, God chose Abraham to be the father of his chosen nation. Jacob. Jacob was one of two grandsons of Abraham. Working with his mother, Rebekah, he deceived his father, Isaac. into giving the blessing of the firstborn to him instead of his twin brother Esau. But like his grandfather Abraham, and in spite of his flaws, Jacob was the one God chose to fulfill his promise to bless the entire world. His 12 sons became the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. And his son Joseph was used by God to save the people of Egypt as well as his own family from a devastating famine. Job. Job was a prosperous farmer living in the land of Uz. We don't know the precise location of Uz or when Job may have lived, but the way Job's family, wealth, and religious practices are described seem to indicate that he lived around the time of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He lost everything that mattered to him and was struck with painful sores, but he remained faithful to God in spite of his suffering. The books in this section is Genesis and Job. The dates are from 2100 BC to 1800 BC, and the themes are promises, God's faithfulness, and suffering. Mega themes. Promises. God makes promises to help and protect people. This kind of promise is called a covenant. God's covenant with Abraham involved making him into a great nation that would become a blessing to all nations. God kept his promises then, and he keeps them now. He promises to love us, accept us, and forgive us. Obedience and disobedience. Disobedience separates us from God, but obeying him restores our relationship with him. God uses sinful people in his plan, but the only way to enjoy the benefits of God's promises is to turn from sin and obey him. Israel. God founded the nation of Israel in order to have a dedicated people who would teach the world about him and prepare the world for the birth of his son, Jesus. God is looking for people today to follow him as well. We are to proclaim God's truth and love to all nations. We must be faithful to carry out the mission God has given us. Suffering. Through no fault of his own, Job lost his wealth, children, and health. Even his friends were convinced that Job had brought his suffering upon himself. Oh my gosh, I remember that long story. For Job, the greatest trial was not the pain of the loss. Rather, it was not being able to understand why God allowed him to suffer. Those who love God are not exempt from trouble. Although we may not be able to understand fully the reasons for the pain we experience, it can lead us to rediscover God. God's goodness. God is all-wise, all-powerful, and all-loving. His will is perfect, yet he doesn't always act in ways that we understand. Abraham and Sarah didn't understand why they weren't able to have children when they were of normal childbearing age, but they trusted God's promise and were blessed with a son. Job's suffering didn't make sense to him, but when God spoke to him, he saw God's power and wisdom. God is never insensitive to our suffering, even if it feels like we are alone and he is far away. Because God is sufficient, we must hold on to him. Books in this section: Genesis. Author, Moses. Audience, the people of Israel. The purpose: to record God's creation of the world and his desire to have people worship him. Date written: approximately 1450 to 1410 BC. Were written in the wilderness during Israel's wanderings, somewhere in the Sinai Peninsula. I like to say cyanide personally, but I know it's cyanide. Job, author unknown. Purpose: to demonstrate God's sovereignty. It addresses the question, why do the righteous suffer? Date written, unknown. Seems to record events that take place around the time of the patriarchs, approximately 2000 to 1800 BC. Setting: the land of Uz, possibly located northeast of Palestine, near the desert land between Damascus and the Euphrates River. Special features: Job is the first of the poetic books in the Hebrew Bible. So we have a map here and a list of places. So number 1 is the Ur of the Chaldeans. Abram, a descendant of Shem and the father of the Hebrew nation, was born in this great city. 2, we have Haran. Terah, Abram, Lot, and Sarai left Ur and, following the fertile crescent of the Euphrates River, headed toward the land of Canaan. Along the way, they settled in the village of Haran for a while. Shechem. God urged Abram to leave Haran and go to a place where he would become the father of a great nation. So Abram, Lot, and Sarai traveled to the land of Canaan and settled near a city called Shechem. Hebron. Abram moved to Hebron, where he put down his deepest roots. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all lived and were buried here. Beersheba. The well at Beersheba was a source of conflict between Abraham and King Abimelech, and later became a sign of the oath that they swore here. Years later, as Isaac was moving from place to place, God appeared to him here and passed on to him the covenant he had made with his father Abraham. Morning. Bethel. After deceiving his brother, Jacob left Beersheba and fled to Haran. Along the way, God revealed himself to Jacob in a dream and passed on the covenant he had made with Abraham and Isaac. Jacob lived in Haran, worked for Laban, and married Leah and Rachel. After a tense meeting with his brother Esau, Jacob returned to Bethel, Egypt. Jacob had 12 sons, including Joseph, Jacob's favorite. Joseph's 10 older brothers grew jealous until one day the brothers sold him to Ishmaelite traders going to Egypt. Eventually, Joseph rose from the Egyptian slave to Pharaoh's right-hand man, saving Egypt from famine. His entire family moved from Canaan to Egypt and settled here. And we're finally going into Genesis 12, 1-9, the story of Abraham. Despite God's swift judgment of sin, most people ignored him and continued to sin. But God revealed himself to Abram, who would later be renamed Abraham, and chose to use Abraham's family to be the instrument of his salvation plan for humanity. Abraham was not chosen because he was a perfect man. In fact, his life demonstrated some great flaws, but he also demonstrated great faith in God and his promises. 1. God promises a nation to Abram. God appeared to Abram one day and promised to make his descendants into a great nation. Abram's part of the agreement was to obey God, leaving his homeland and traveling across the known world. Through this section, we discover how to live a life of faith. The call of Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be blessed, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram departed as the Lord had instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and all his wealth, his livestock, and all the people he had taken into his household at Haran, and headed for the land of Canaan. When they arrived in Canaan, Abram traveled through the land as far as Shechem. There he set up camp beside the oak of Moreh. At that time, the area was inhabited by Canaanites. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "I will give this land to your descendants." And Abram built an altar there and dedicated it to the Lord, who had appeared to him. After that, Abram traveled south and set up camp in the hill country, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built another altar and dedicated it to the Lord, and he worshipped the Lord. Then Abram continued traveling south by stages toward the Negev. Abram and Sarai in Egypt. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, "Look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife. Let's kill him. Then we can have her.' So please tell them that you are my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you." And sure enough, when Abram arrived in Egypt, everyone noticed Sarai's beauty. When the palace officials saw her, they sang her praises to Pharaoh, their king, and Sarai was taken into his palace. Then Pharaoh gave Abram many gifts because of her: sheep, goats, cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. But the Lord sent terrible plagues upon Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh summoned Abram and accused him sharply. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' and allow me to take her as my wife?" No, wait. Yeah. "Now then, here is your wife. Take her and get out of here." Pharaoh ordered some of his men to escort them, and he sent Abram out of the country along with his wife and all his possessions. That was the end of part 1. So, we're going back into the synopsis of the section. When God called him, Abram moved out in faith from Ur to Haran and finally to Canaan. God then established a covenant with Abram, telling him that he would be the founder of a great nation. Not only would this nation be blessed, God said, but the other nations of the earth would be blessed through Abram's descendants. Israel, the nation that would come from Abram, was to follow God and influence those with whom it came in contact. Through Abram's family tree, Jesus Christ was born to save humanity. Through Christ, people can have a personal relationship with God and be blessed beyond measure. God promised to bless Abram and make him famous. But God had one condition. Abram had to do what God wanted him to do. This meant leaving his home and friends and traveling to a new land where God promised to build a great nation from Abram's family. Abram obeyed, walking away from his home for God's promise of even greater blessings in the future. God may be trying to lead you to a place of greater service and usefulness for him. Don't let the comfort and security of your present position make you miss God's plan for you. God planned to develop a nation of people he would call his own. He called Abram from the godless, self-centered city of Ur to a fertile region called Canaan, where a God-centered, moral nation could be established. Though small in dimension, the land of Canaan was the focal point for most of the history of Israel, as well as for the rise of Christianity. This small land, given to one man, Abram, has had a tremendous impact on world history. Abram built an altar to the Lord. Altars were used in many religions, but for God's people, altars were more than places of sacrifice. They symbolized communion with God and commemorated notable encounters with him. Built of rough stones and earth, altars often remained in place for years as continual reminders of God's protection and promises. Abram regularly built altars to God for two reasons. One, for prayer and worship, and two, as reminders of God's promise to bless him. Abram couldn't survive spiritually without regularly renewing his love and loyalty to God. Building altars helped Abram remember that God was at the center of his life. Regular worship helps us remember what God desires and motivates us to obey him. When famine struck, Abraham went to Egypt where there was food. Why would God allow a famine in the land where he had just called Abram? This was a test of Abram's faith, and Abram passed. He didn't question God's leading when facing this difficulty. Many believers find that when they determine to follow God, they immediately encounter great obstacles. The next time you face such a test, don't try to second guess what God is doing. Use the intelligence God has given you, as Abram did when he temporarily moved to Egypt, and wait for new opportunities. Songboard.
Coming soon.
Abram, acting out of fear, asked Sarai to tell a half-truth by saying she was his sister. She was his half-sister, but she was also his wife. Abram's intent was to deceive the Egyptians. He feared that if they knew the truth, they would kill him to get Sarai. She would have been a desirable addition to Pharaoh's harem because of her wealth, beauty, and potential for political alliance. As Sarai's brother, Abram would have been given a place of honor, but as her husband, his life would be in danger because Sarai could not enter Pharaoh's harem unless Abram was dead. So Abram lost faith in God's protection even after all God had promised him and told a half-truth. When he lied, Abram's problems multiplied. Lying usually compounds the effects of sin. Genesis 15:18. Right. So we're going into Abraham's, what we calling this box?
A
biography.
Yeah.
A slight biography.
Right. Some like
Abraham.
Like bio.
Slight bio. Abraham. We all know that there are consequences to our actions. What we do can set into motion a series of events that may continue long after we're gone. Unfortunately, when we are making a decision, most of us think only of the immediate consequences. There are often These are often misleading because they are short-lived. Abraham had a choice to make. His decision was between setting out with his family and the belongings for parts unknown or staying right where he was. He had to decide between the security of what he already had and the uncertainty of traveling under God's direction. All he had to do was All he had to go on was God's promise to guide and bless him. Abraham could hardly have been expected to visualize how much of the future was resting on his decision of whether to go or stay. But his obedience affected the history of the world. His decision to follow God set into motion the development of the nation that God would eventually use as his own when he visited earth himself. When Jesus Christ came to earth, God's promise was fulfilled. Through Abraham, the entire world was blessed. You probably don't know the long-term effects of most decisions you make. But shouldn't the fact that there will be long-term results cause you to think carefully and seek God's guidance as you make choices and take action today? His faith pleased God, became the founder of the Jewish nation, was not only a caring father to his own family, but practiced hospitality to others, was a successful and wealthy rancher, and usually avoided conflicts. But when they were unavoidable, he allowed his opponent to set the rules for settling the dispute. Weakness and mistake. Under direct pressure, he distorted the truth. Lessons from his life. God desires dependence, trust, and faith in him, not faith in our ability to please him. God's plan from the beginning has been to make himself known to all people. Vital statistics. Where, born in Ur of the Chaldeans, spent most of his life in the land of Canaan. Occupation, wealthy livestock owner. Relatives, brothers Nahor and Haran, father Terah, wife Sarah, nephew Lot, sons Ishmael and Isaac. Contemporaries were Abimelech and Melchizedek. Key verse. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. Genesis 15:6. Abraham's story is told in Genesis. He is also mentioned in Exodus, Matthew, Luke, Acts, Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews. That was the readings of the morning. Woo! Tomorrow, we will get into Abram and Lot on page 32. Thank you all for watching. Make sure you all subscribe so you all will know when we upload to YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. We live every morning on Twitch. Or every morning. Now we could be live on Twitch. We'll be live on Twitch reading this book. And yeah.